The year is 1922. A young medical researcher sits in his lab in the University of Toronto, afraid he's made another terrible mistake. He stares at his notes. Well, there's another failed experiment. His colleagues think he's wasting time and resources. The faculty has given him just a tiny lab and a few short months to prove his theory. With no money left, he's now facing the pressure to just give up. But that discouraged researcher decided to push through his fears to make one of the greatest medical discoveries in history. Within a year, insulin would save its first life, a dying 14-year-old boy. Today, millions of people with diabetes owe their lives to Frederick Banting's courage, to his refusal to give up when fear and doubt told him to quit. Maybe you know the feeling. Perhaps you've experienced a moment in your life when everything in you wanted to just quit. What if there's more to life than letting fear win? What if the very situation that terrifies you could become the ground where you discover strength and courage that you never knew you had? Many Canadians wrestle with fear in ways that rarely make headlines. For example, at universities across the country, talented researchers like Frederick Banting face the fear of failure as they pursue breakthrough discoveries. In offices from Vancouver all the way to Halifax, entrepreneurs contemplate whether to launch their ideas into the world. In homes throughout our communities, parents wrestle with difficult decisions, afraid of making the wrong choice for their kids. What makes fear particularly challenging is this ability to disguise itself. Sometimes it looks like procrastination. Oh, I'll do it when I'm better prepared. Other times it wears the mask of wisdom. It's not the right time right now. Sometimes it's even disguised itself as humility. I don't deserve this. I'll let someone else enjoy the spotlight. Mental health professionals and career counselors consistently report that unaddressed fear often leads to what they call life consolidation, where people actually shrink their world to avoid what frightens them. Instead of expanding into new opportunities, they find themselves in an increasingly smaller comfort zone. In the Bible, we find a story that mirrors these modern struggles with fear. It's the story of a man named Gideon, a man we first meet hiding in a wine press threshing wheat. Now, if you know anything about threshing wheat, you know it's typically done on a hilltop where the wind can blow away the chaff. Doing it in a wine press is not only inefficient, it's a clear sign of someone letting fear dictate their actions. What's remarkable about Gideon's story is how relatable it is. Here's a man so afraid of the Midianites that he's literally working underground. He's not a mighty warrior when we meet him. He's not a confident leader. He's just someone trying to survive. But why was Gideon afraid of the Midianites? Well, the Midianites were a nomadic raider tribe who would regularly attack and terrorize the Israelites during the time of Gideon, which was around 1100 BC. They were descendants of Midian, a son of Abraham through his wife, Keturah. But here's what's interesting. This very man who started out hiding would eventually lead an army of 300 and win a battle against overwhelming odds. The same person who was hiding in fear would become known as one of Israel's greatest judges. Not because he was naturally courageous, but because he learned a crucial truth. Courage isn't about the absence of fear. It's about moving forward despite of it. Whether you're facing a major decision that terrifies you or dealing with the kind of everyday fears that slowly shrink your world, there's hope for finding courage. And it starts with understanding that there's more to life than letting fear call the shots. Your story of courage might look different from Banting's scientific breakthrough or Gideon's military victory, but it's no less significant. Because sometimes the greatest acts of courage happen not on battlefields or in laboratories, but in ordinary moments when we choose to face our fears rather than hide from them. When we meet Gideon in the book of Judges, he's not leading an army or making bold declarations. Instead, we find him threshing wheat in a wine press, literally trying to stay out of sight. Let me give you some context about why this is significant. You see, the Midianites weren't just an occasional threat. They were a systematic force of devastation. Judges chapter 6, verses 1 to 6 tells us they would swarm into Israel like locusts during harvest season. They would destroy crops, stealing livestock, and stripping the land bare. This had been going on for 7 years. And just imagine trying to run a farm when you know raiders might appear at any moment to steal your harvest. That's the world Gideon was living in. This is where God meets him. And what happens next reveals 3 transformative truths about finding courage. The first truth is that courage grows in unlikely places. When we first meet Gideon in Judges chapter 6, verse 11, it says, "Then the angel of the Lord came and sat beneath the great tree at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash of the clan of Abiezer." Gideon, son of Joash, was threshing wheat at the bottom of a winepress to hide the grain from the Midianites. Think about this scene for a moment. A winepress is essentially a pit carved into rock where grapes are crushed. It's dark, it's cramped, and about the last place you'd expect to find someone threshing wheat. It's also the last place you'd expect to find Israel's next great leader. This is exactly where God shows up. This wasn't a palace or a military command center. This was a place of fear, a place of hiding. In fact, the very location itself demonstrated just how bad things had gotten. Now imagine being so afraid that you're willing to make your work 10 times harder just to stay hidden. That's where Gideon was, literally and figuratively at his lowest point. But here's what's amazing. You know that wine press, that place of fear and hiding? That place became sacred ground. The transformation that began in that wine press would culminate in one of the most remarkable military victories in history. This same Gideon would eventually lead just 300 men against a Midianite army of 135,000. Using only trumpets, clay jars, and torches, they would overthrow an enemy force that had terrorized Israel for 7 years. The man hiding in the winepress would become known as one of Israel's greatest judges, and his story would be referenced throughout Scripture as an example of what God can do through unlikely people in unlikely places. Sometimes our places of weakness are exactly where our greatest victories begin. We often think courage will find us when the conditions are perfect, but Gideon's story shows us something different. Courage often finds us in our wine presses, those places where we feel least qualified, least prepared, and most afraid. The very place that seems least likely to birth courage might be exactly where God wants to meet you. It's not about feeling brave in our places of strength. It's about finding strength in our places of weakness. The second truth about courage we learn from Gideon's story is that courage requires redefining victory. Just when Gideon had gathered an army of 32,000 men to fight the Midianites, God did something unexpected. First, he told Gideon to send home anyone who was afraid. And so 22,000 soldiers actually left. Then God said it was still too many. He had Gideon bring the remaining 10,000 to drink water. Those who lapped water like dogs, was just 300 of them. Those were the ones that were chosen. The rest were sent home. Then comes what must have seemed like even more bizarre of a battle plan. In Judges chapter 7, verses 16 to 18, we read, he divided the 300 men into 3 groups and gave each man a ram's horn and a clay jar with a torch in it. Then he said to them, keep your eyes on me. When I come to the edge of the camp, do just as I do. As soon as I and those with me blow the ram's horns, blow your horns too all around the entire camp and shout for the Lord and for Gideon. Let's pause here and consider this strategy. No swords, no spears, no traditional weapons at all. Instead, they're armed with musical instruments and clay pots and torches. I mean, imagine being one of those 300 men. You've watched 31,700 of your fellow soldiers go home. You're now facing an army of 135,000 Midianites, and now your leader hands you a trumpet and a jar instead of a sword? Everything in your military training is screaming that this is not how battles are won. Yet this unconventional approach would lead to one of the most decisive victories in Israel's history. That night, the Midianites, in their confusion and fear, ended up fighting each other and fleeing in panic. God took what looked like foolishness and turned it into triumph that would be remembered for generations. You know, this challenges our modern understanding of what courage looks like. We often think courage means having all the right resources, looking competent and capable, being in control. But sometimes real courage means moving forward when we don't feel ready, following God's unusual methods, surrendering control. Finally, the third truth we learn about courage in this story is that courage is built, not born. Here's where Gideon's story gets practical, because God's first assignment for him isn't to face the Midianite army. Instead, in verses 25 to 26, he tells Gideon to tear down his father's altar to Baal and build a proper altar to the Lord. It's a smaller, more manageable act of courage, but one that would still require a significant amount of bravery. Notice what Gideon does in verse 27. It says, so Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord had commanded. But he did it at night because he was afraid of the other members of his father's household and the people of the town. Did you catch that? Gideon was still afraid, but he acted anyways. He did it at night, yes, but he did it. This teaches us something important about courage. You don't have to feel courageous to act courageously. Sometimes courage means doing what needs to be done, even while your knees are shaking. What's remarkable is how God used this smaller act of courage as preparation for bigger challenges. Before Gideon could lead an army against the Midianites, he had to face the idolatry in his own home. Before he could deliver Israel, he had to start with delivering his own family from false worship. The progression in Gideon's story is fascinating, from hiding in a wine press, to destroying an idol at night, to eventually leading 300 men against an overwhelming army. Each step built upon the last. God didn't expect Gideon to go from fearful to fearless overnight. Instead, he led him through a process of growing in courage. You know, there's a powerful parallel between Gideon's story and Jesus' teaching on courage. In John chapter 16, verse 33, it says that Jesus tells his disciples, I have told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart, because I have overcome the world. Just as God was with Gideon, Jesus promises to be with us and give us the courage that we need. In both cases, courage isn't based on our own strengths or abilities. Gideon's strength wasn't in his military expertise. He had none, basically. It wasn't in his natural leadership abilities either. He had none of those. He was hiding when God found him. His strength came from the same source available to us today, the presence of God. Look at what God tells him in Judges chapter 6, verses 16. The Lord said to him, I will be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man. The emphasis isn't on Gideon's ability, but on God's presence. This same truth is repeated throughout the Bible, all the way to Jesus' final words to his disciples. In Matthew chapter 28, verse 20, he says, teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you. And be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Think about that. The very thing that makes courage possible isn't the absence of fear, but the presence of God. Sometimes we're waiting to feel courageous before we step out, but Gideon's story shows us that courage often grows through small steps, even when we're feeling afraid. Author and pastor Max Lucado puts it this way: courage does not panic, it prays. Courage does not bemoan, it believes. Courage does not languish, it listens. The next time fear blocks your way, call on Gideon. He'll remind you that God isn't looking for fearless warriors. He's looking for faithful ones. What situation are you facing today that requires courage? Maybe like Gideon, you're hiding not in a wine press, but behind excuses, behind procrastination, or the appearance of having it all together. Perhaps God is calling you to something that seems impossible from where you stand. Just remember, Gideon's journey to courage didn't start with facing an army. It started with one small step of obedience. What is that one small step for you today?
If you haven't already partnered with us as an agent of hope, I want to share with you how you can do so. Above all, we need your prayers. Pray that these programs will speak to the hearts of people all across Canada. Also, any time that you have to spare in order to volunteer with one of our projects will be greatly appreciated. Lastly, your financial support would be greatly appreciated. You can make a one-time or a recurring donation. Thank you once again for joining us on this exciting journey of sharing hope across Canada and beyond.
Looking at Gideon's remarkable journey from hiding in a wine press to leading an army, here are 3 reflective questions to help you discover courage in your own life. Number 1, what is your wine press? Just as Gideon was hiding in a wine press when God found him, take a moment to honestly identify, where are you hiding right now? What situations are you avoiding out of fear? What dreams have you buried because they seem impossible? How is fear affecting your relationships, your career, or even your spiritual life? Remember, Gideon's wine press became the very spot where God met him. Your place of hiding might be the exact location where courage begins. Maybe it's that business plan you keep revising instead of actually launching, the manuscript sitting in your drawer, that conversation you keep postponing, that decision you're afraid to make, or that relationship you know you need to restore. The wine press can also represent patterns of behavior that keep us safe but stuck. For example, perfectionism that prevents you from taking action. Procrastination, busyness that helps us avoid what really matters. Excuses that sound reasonable, but really they're just hiding fear. The second reflection question is, what is your jar and torch? Gideon had to trust God's unconventional battle plan, a plan that seemed foolish by military standards. So consider, what unexpected methods might God be asking you to trust? What solutions have you dismissed because they don't match your expectations? What resources do you already have that you might be overlooking? Sometimes courage means being willing to look foolish, to try methods that don't make sense to others. Your jar and torch might be something like starting small when others say, go big or go home. Or choosing relationship over efficiency. Or following God's timing when the world says, do it now or never. Remember, Gideon's victory didn't come through traditional weapons, but through trumpets, through jars and torches. And so what unconventional tools has God already placed in your hands? And finally, number 3, what is your first step? Remember, courage is built, it's not born. Gideon's journey from fearful farmer to military leader happened one step at a time. And so ask yourself, what small step can you take today? What's the next right thing in front of you? What action can you take even if you don't feel ready? Who needs you to be brave right now? What would moving forward look like in your situation? And so this week, I encourage you to begin by naming your fear. Take time to write down exactly what you're afraid of. Be specific about what's holding you back. After you've identified it, think about what this fear has cost you. Share your fear with one trusted person who can support you on your journey, and then focus on just starting small, taking one small step. I encourage you to choose one act of courage, whether that's making that phone call you've been avoiding, sending that email you've been drafting, having that conversation you've been postponing, or taking one step toward that bigger goal in your life. Finally, keep your eyes open for the unlikely ways God might be working. Notice the coincidences. Listen for His voice in unusual ways. Watch for doors opening in unexpected directions and remain open to His solutions. The key is to stay alert to how God might be moving in ways you wouldn't expect. Remember, just as God gave Gideon time to grow in courage, give yourself grace in this process. You don't have to figure it all out at once. Start where you are. Use what you have and do what you can. If you're facing a situation that requires courage right now, I want you to know that you're not alone. You can follow More to Life on social media, where you can connect with me and others on similar journeys and find daily encouragement for your path to courage.
Have you ever asked these questions? Why am I here? Is there a God? Why is there so much evil and suffering? And why are there so many different religions, and which one is true? Is the Bible fact or fiction? Who is Jesus of Nazareth? Was He truly God, as Christians say He is? And why did Jesus come to earth to die? And how does His death offer us salvation? What happens when I die? Is there really a heaven or hell? These questions and others we answer on our online Bible study platform at hopestudy.ca. There, you will find answers to these and other life-changing questions. If you have any questions, please email us at hopestudy@hopetv.ca. God bless you. See you there.
In Thornhill, Ontario in 1995, 12-year-old Craig Kyleberger was having breakfast when a newspaper article caught his eye. It was about another 12-year-old boy named Iqbal Masih, who had been murdered for speaking out against child labor in Pakistan. Craig's comfortable kitchen couldn't have been further from Pakistan's carpet factories. But in that moment, something shifted. He could have turned the page. He could have just said, well, I'm a kid, what can I do? Many would have understood. Instead, That ordinary morning became an extraordinary turning point. With just a handful of classmates, Craig started Free the Children. His methods were simple, too simple, according to many adults who dismissed them. He began by telling Iqbal's story to anyone who would listen. He wrote letters. He gathered friends, like Gideon with his jars and torches. His approach didn't fit conventional wisdom. Who would take a group of 12-year-olds seriously anyways? What difference could they possibly make against something as vast as global child labor? But Craig and his friends persisted. They spoke at schools, knocked on doors, and refused to be silent. That small beginning has since grown into We Charity, an international organization that has built over 1,500 schools, empowered entire communities, and provided education to more than 200,000 children. One boy's step of courage has inspired millions of young people to believe they too can make a difference. Today, we've uncovered 3 transformative truths about courage through Gideon's story and seen them echoed in Craig's journey as well. We've learned that courage often grows in unlikely places, even in our wine presses of fear. We've discovered that courage sometimes requires redefining what victory looks like. And we've seen that courage is built step by step, one step at a time. It's not born in an instant. Maybe you're in your own wine press right now. Perhaps you're facing odds that seem as overwhelming as Gideon's 300 against 135,000. Or maybe, like young Craig, you're looking at a problem that seems way too big for you to tackle. Just remember, Gideon's story doesn't begin with victory over the Midianites. It begins with God meeting Gideon exactly where he was, afraid, uncertain, and hiding. The same God who transformed that man into one of Israel's greatest judges wants to meet you where you are. Your story of courage might not look like leading an army or starting an international foundation. It might be finally launching that small business, having that difficult conversation with your teenager, going back to school after 20 years, or choosing to trust God with an impossible situation. But here's what I want you to remember. There's more to life than hiding in fear. There's more to your story than your current chapter of uncertainty. And sometimes, just like with Gideon and Craig, what starts in a wine press can become a testimony of courage that inspires others.